The morning sky over New York burned with colors that had no names in any human language. Massive ships descended through the atmosphere like falling mountains, their hulls gleaming with alien metals that bent light in impossible ways. Sarah Chen pressed her face against the window of her apartment on the 47th floor, watching as humanity's world changed forever. The Zephyrian Empire had come to Earth with the confidence of conquerors who had never known defeat. For 3,000 years they had swept across the galaxy, adding world after world to their vast domain. Their scouts had observed Earth for months, noting the primitive technology, the divided nations, the small population of barely 8 billion souls. To them, humanity was just another backwater species ready for subjugation. Admiral Kethvar stood on the bridge of the flagship Eternal Dominion, his forearms crossed behind his back as he gazed down at the blue world below. His reptilian features showed nothing but calm satisfaction. This would be the easiest conquest in the Empire's history. The humans still used chemical rockets and fought with projectile weapons. Their most advanced computers were laughably primitive compared to Zephyrian technology from centuries past. "Begin the demonstration," he ordered, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had conquered 47 worlds. The first strike hit the abandoned military base in Nevada. The beam of pure energy carved through rock and metal like a knife through water, leaving behind a crater of glass, where once stood billions of dollars of human engineering. The message was clear: surrender or face annihilation. Sarah's phone buzzed with emergency alerts in 12 languages. Every screen in the city displayed the same message: surrender immediately. Resistance is futile. You have one Earth rotation to comply. But they had underestimated humanity's greatest strength: the refusal to kneel. President Martinez stood before the United Nations Assembly, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting worldwide. "They expect us to surrender because we seem weak. They think our technology is primitive. They believe our divisions make us vulnerable." She paused, looking out at representatives from every nation on Earth. "They don't understand that humanity's greatest weapon isn't technology or unity, it's stubbornness." The laughter that followed was grim but determined. Every delegate knew what surrender meant. They had seen the reports from other conquered worlds. Entire populations enslaved, cultures erased, children taken to serve as soldiers in the Empire's endless expansion. Dr. James Morrison, head of the Emergency Defense Initiative, stepped forward with data that made several delegates gasp. "Our deep space monitoring stations detected something the aliens missed. Earth isn't just our home. It's a fortress they don't know they've entered." The images on the screen showed what appeared to be asteroids and space debris scattered throughout the solar system. But Morrison's team had discovered the truth hidden in decades-old classified files. Humanity had been preparing for this day longer than anyone realized. Project Icarus began in 1987, Morrison explained. Not as a weapon, but as a contingency. Hidden among the asteroid belt, disguised as mining operations and research stations, we built something the Zephyrians can't detect with their scans. The room fell silent as Morrison revealed humanity's secret: a network of self-replicating automated factories, each one capable of producing weapons, ships, and soldiers. They had been growing quietly for decades, powered by solar collectors and sustained by resources from countless asteroids. "How many?" President Martinez asked quietly. "Current estimates suggest 40,000 active units spread across the outer system, with production capacity increasing exponentially. The aliens think they're facing 8 billion humans on one world. They have no idea they've walked into a system defended by trillions of automated defenders." Admiral Kethvar received the humans' response exactly 24 hours after his ultimatum. Instead of surrender, they broadcast a single message across all frequencies: "No." He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Activate ground forces. Begin the harvest of this stubborn species." The first wave of Zephyrian dropships descended toward major population centers. Each craft carried 1,000 elite soldiers equipped with energy weapons and personal shields that could deflect any human projectile weapon. They had used this exact strategy on dozens of worlds with perfect success. The dropships never reached the ground. They materialized first as specks of light in the upper atmosphere, small, fast-moving objects that Earth's primitive radar had somehow failed to detect. But these weren't meteors or space debris. They were humanity's guardians, emerging from hiding places throughout the solar system where they had waited patiently for this moment. The automated defense drones struck with surgical precision. Each one was barely larger than a human fighter jet, but they moved with inhuman coordination and carried weapons that defied conventional physics. They sliced through Zephyrian shields like paper and turned the mighty dropships into falling debris. On his flagship, Admiral Kethvar watched in growing alarm as his invasion force was systematically destroyed. These human machines moved unlike anything in his experience. They anticipated his tactics, adapted to his strategies, and fought with a coordination that suggested a single, vast intelligence guiding them all. "Impossible," he whispered. The intelligence reports showed no such technology. His communications officer, young and inexperienced, made the mistake of speaking the truth. "Sir, the human's message is broadcasting again. They're laughing at us." The message that reached every Zephyrian ship was simple but chilling. It showed a human female, the same President Martinez who had addressed the United Nations. But now she spoke directly to the Empire's forces. "You made two mistakes," she said calmly. "First, you assumed we were alone. Second, you assumed we were primitive." The camera pulled back to show her standing in what appeared to be a command center buried deep underground. Behind her, screens showed the real-time destruction of the Zephyrian invasion force. "Humanity has been preparing for this day since we first looked at the stars and wondered what else was out there. You wanted to add us to your empire. Instead, you've awakened something that's going to tear your empire apart." As the transmission ended, Admiral Kethvar faced a reality that the Zephyrian Empire had never encountered. They weren't the predators in this situation. They were the prey, and humanity was just getting started. The morning sky over New York burned with colors that had no names in any human language. Massive ships descended through the atmosphere like falling mountains, their hulls gleaming with alien metals that bent light in impossible ways. Sarah Chen pressed her face against the window of her apartment on the 47th floor, watching as humanity's world changed forever. The Zephyrian Empire had come to Earth with the confidence of conquerors who had never known defeat. For 3,000 years they had swept across the galaxy, adding world after world to their vast domain. Their scouts had observed Earth for months, noting the primitive technology, the divided nations, the small population of barely 8 billion souls. To them, humanity was just another backwater species ready for subjugation. Admiral Kethvar stood on the bridge of the flagship Eternal Dominion, his forearms crossed behind his back as he gazed down at the blue world below. His reptilian features showed nothing but calm satisfaction. This would be the easiest conquest in the Empire's history. The humans still used chemical rockets and fought with projectile weapons. Their most advanced computers were laughably primitive compared to Zephyrian technology from centuries past. "Begin the demonstration," he ordered, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had conquered 47 worlds. The first strike hit the abandoned military base in Nevada. The beam of pure energy carved through rock and metal like a knife through water, leaving behind a crater of glass where once stood billions of dollars of human engineering. The message was clear: surrender or face annihilation. Sarah's phone buzzed with emergency alerts in 12 languages. Every screen in the city displayed the same message: surrender immediately. Resistance is futile. You have one Earth rotation to comply. But they had underestimated humanity's greatest strength: the refusal to kneel. President Martinez stood before the United Nations Assembly, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting worldwide. "They expect us to surrender because we seem weak. They think our technology is primitive. They believe our divisions make us vulnerable." She paused, looking out at representatives from every nation on Earth. "They don't understand that humanity's greatest weapon isn't technology or unity. It's stubbornness." The laughter that followed was grim but determined. Every delegate knew what surrender meant. They had seen the reports from other conquered worlds: entire populations enslaved, cultures erased, children taken to serve as soldiers in the Empire's endless expansion. Dr. James Morrison, head of the Emergency Defense Initiative, stepped forward with data that made several delegates gasp. "Our deep space monitoring stations detected something the aliens missed. Earth isn't just our home. It's a fortress they don't know they've entered." The images on the screen showed what appeared to be asteroids and space debris scattered throughout the solar system. But Morrison's team had discovered the truth hidden in decades-old classified files. Humanity had been preparing for this day longer than anyone realized. Project Icarus began in 1987, Morrison explained, not as a weapon but as a contingency, hidden among the asteroid belt, disguised as mining operations and research stations. We built something the Zephyrians can't detect with their scans. The room fell silent as Morrison revealed humanity's secret, a network of self-replicating automated factories, each one capable of producing weapons, ships, and soldiers. They had been growing quietly for decades, powered by solar collectors and sustained by resources from countless asteroids. How many? President Martinez asked quietly. Current estimates suggest 40,000 active units spread across the outer system, with production capacity increasing exponentially. The aliens think they're facing 8 billion humans on one world. They have no idea they've walked into a system defended by trillions of automated defenders. Admiral Kethvar received the humans' response exactly 24 hours after his ultimatum. Instead of surrender, they broadcast a single message across all frequencies. No. He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Activate ground forces. Begin the harvest of this stubborn species. The first wave of Zephyrian dropships descended toward major population centers. Each craft carried 1,000 elite soldiers equipped with energy weapons and personal shields that could deflect any human projectile weapon. They had used this exact strategy on dozens of worlds with perfect success. The dropships never reached the ground. They materialized first as specks of light in the upper atmosphere, small, fast-moving objects that Earth's primitive radar had somehow failed to detect. But these weren't meteors or space debris. They were humanity's guardians, emerging from hiding places throughout the solar system where they had waited patiently for this moment. The automated defense drones struck with surgical precision. Each one was barely larger than a human fighter jet, but they moved with inhuman coordination and carried weapons that defied conventional physics. They sliced through Zephyrian shields like paper and turned the mighty dropships into falling debris. On his flagship, Admiral Kethvar watched in growing alarm as his invasion force was systematically destroyed. These human machines moved unlike anything in his experience. They anticipated his tactics, adapted to his strategies, and fought with a coordination that suggested a single vast intelligence guiding them all. Impossible, he whispered. The intelligence report showed no such technology. His communications officer, young and inexperienced, made the mistake of speaking the truth. Sir, the humans' message is broadcasting again. They're laughing at us. The message that reached every Zephyrian ship was simple but chilling. It showed a human female, the same President Martinez who had addressed the United Nations. But now she spoke directly to the Empire's forces. You made two mistakes, she said calmly. First, you assumed we were alone. Second, you assumed we were primitive. The camera pulled back to show her standing in what appeared to be a command center buried deep underground. Behind her, screen showed the real-time destruction of the Zephyrian invasion force. Humanity has been preparing for this day since we first looked at the stars and wondered what else was out there. You wanted to add us to your empire. Instead, you've awakened something that's going to tear your empire apart. As the transmission ended, Admiral Kethvar faced a reality that the Zephyrian Empire had never encountered. They weren't the predators in this situation. They were the prey, and humanity was just getting started. 5 years after humanity's first contact with the Zephyrian Empire, Sarah Chen stood at the edge of known reality, preparing to take the next step in galactic evolution. The Nexus Station floated in the void between galaxies, a construct that existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions that had no names in any language. Built through the combined efforts of 47 species working with technologies that merged science and consciousness. It served as humanity's staging ground for their first mission as galactic gardeners. Final systems check complete, reported Commander Marcus Webb, who had once been a maintenance technician on the International Space Station and now commanded vessels that could rewrite the laws of physics. All reality anchors are stable, consciousness matrices are synchronized, and the probability navigation systems are showing green across the board. Sarah nodded, though her attention was focused on the view beyond the station's transparent walls. The Andromeda Galaxy spread before them like a spiral of light against the cosmic darkness, each star potentially home to civilizations that had never known there were alternatives to competition and conflict. Nervous? Asked Kiraval, who had become Sarah's closest friend and collaborator during the transformation of their home galaxy. The former Zephyrian princess had evolved beyond her species' original form, her consciousness now existing as much in quantum probability as in physical matter. Excited, Sarah replied honestly. We're about to meet civilizations that have been developing for millions of years without any contact with gardener species. They've had to figure everything out on their own, make every mistake, fight every unnecessary war. The mission they were preparing for represented the largest cooperative effort in galactic history. Teams from every member species of the Cooperative Alliance had spent 3 years studying Andromeda's civilizations through long-range quantum observation. What they found was both inspiring and heartbreaking. Hundreds of species locked in cycles of conquest and expansion, each one believing that dominance was the only path to security. Dr. Morrison materialized beside them, his consciousness transmitted instantaneously from Earth, where he continued to coordinate humanity's research efforts. The Andromedans remind me of us 5 years ago, he said thoughtfully. They've achieved remarkable things individually, but they're still thinking in terms of zero-sum competition. They don't realize that cooperation could multiply their achievements exponentially. The data they had gathered painted a picture of a galaxy in eternal conflict. The hegemony of Talox controlled the galactic core through military might that dwarfed even the old Zephyrian Empire. The Crystalline Collective had turned entire star systems into fortress worlds, believing that isolation was the only protection against conquest. Dozens of smaller civilizations existed in the spaces between, fighting for resources and territory, while remaining ignorant of the abundance that could be achieved through collaboration. They're not evil, observed Dr. Vextar, whose research into consciousness-based computing had made him one of the galaxy's leading experts on the psychology of civilizational development. They're afraid. Every species we've observed shows the same pattern. They achieved interstellar capability while still believing that survival required defeating others rather than helping them. Emperor Zephytar, now simply Elder Zephytar, had insisted on joining the mission despite his advanced age. I want to see if we can help them avoid the mistakes we made, he explained. The Zephyrian Empire spent 3,000 years conquering worlds that would have gladly shared their knowledge if we had simply asked. The mission plan was elegant in its simplicity. Rather than arriving as a massive fleet that would trigger defensive responses, they would send small teams to individual worlds, each one demonstrating the possibilities of cooperative technology through practical assistance. They would offer solutions to problems the local civilizations couldn't solve alone, proving that collaboration was more effective than conquest. Sarah's team would approach the hegemony of Talox directly, the most dangerous assignment given that civilization's history of absorbing or destroying any species they encountered. But the gardeners had provided specific guidance. Species that achieved dominance through conquest were often the most ready for transformation, because they had already proven they could think on galactic scales. Remember, Sarah addressed the assembled mission teams, we're not trying to conquer or convert anyone. We're simply offering alternatives. If a civilization isn't ready to consider cooperation, we wait. Some seeds take longer to grow than others. The departure was unlike anything that had been attempted before. Instead of traveling through space in the traditional sense, the teams would use consciousness navigation to exist simultaneously in both galaxies, gradually shifting their primary reality from one to the other. It was a technique that required perfect synchronization between multiple minds, a demonstration of the cooperative principles they hoped to teach. Sarah felt the familiar sensation of reality becoming fluid around her as the Nexus Station's consciousness matrices activated. Space and time became suggestions rather than absolutes, allowing her to experience the journey to Andromeda as both an instant transition and a gradual migration across impossible distances. They materialized in orbit around Talox Prime, the capital world of the hegemony, where 16 billion beings lived in cities that stretched from continent to continent. The planet was a monument to the achievements possible through organized conquest, but also to the limitations of thinking that viewed other species as obstacles rather than opportunities. Impressive, admitted Commander Webb as they observed the planet's defenses. Energy shields that could deflect stellar-level attacks, automated defense fleets numbering in the millions, and weapon systems that could sterilize planets from across solar systems. Also inefficient, Kiraval pointed out. Look at the resource allocation. They're spending roughly 30% of their total, productivity on military systems designed to fight enemies who would probably be happy to trade and share knowledge instead. The first contact came, exactly as they had planned. Instead of announcing their presence to the hegemony's military, they appeared in the laboratory of Dr. Zendara, a Taloxian scientist who had been struggling for decades with a seemingly impossible problem: how to provide clean energy for a population that was rapidly outgrowing their solar system. "Greetings, Dr. Zendara," Sarah said, materializing in the scientist's private workspace. "We're here because we might be able to help with your energy distribution problem." The Taloxians' reaction was exactly what they had expected: shock, fear, and then desperate curiosity as she realized that these strange beings had somehow bypassed security systems that had never been penetrated in the hegemony's 1,000-year history. "Who are you? How did you get here?" Dr. Zendara demanded, her forearms reaching for weapons that Sarah gently disabled with a thought. "We're teachers," Sarah replied simply. "We come from a galaxy where civilizations learn to solve problems like yours through cooperation, rather than conquest. Would you like to see what's possible?" What followed was a demonstration that would be remembered in Taloxian history, as the moment their understanding of the universe expanded beyond anything they had imagined possible. Sarah showed Dr. Zendara how to tap directly into quantum vacuum energy, how to distribute power through consciousness-based networks that required no physical infrastructure, and how to transform matter itself into whatever forms were needed. But more importantly, she showed her the philosophical foundations that made such technology possible. The understanding that cooperation multiplied capabilities rather than dividing them, that sharing knowledge made everyone stronger rather than creating vulnerabilities, and that the universe was abundant enough to support the growth of all conscious beings. Dr. Zendara's first question revealed both the potential and the challenge of their mission. "Why would you share such knowledge with us? What do you gain from making us more powerful?" Sarah's answer would be repeated across Andromeda, as humanity and their allies began the long process of teaching an entire galaxy to dream beyond conquest. "We gain partners in discoveries we haven't made yet, friends for adventures we haven't imagined yet, and the joy of watching others achieve things we never could have accomplished alone." The transformation of Andromeda had begun. 1 year after first contact, the galaxy faced its greatest challenge yet: learning to live with unlimited possibilities. Sarah Chen materialized in the Grand Assembly Hall of New Ketha, the floating city that had been constructed above the former imperial capital, using technologies that combined human innovation with the collective knowledge of 47 species. The sight still took her breath away: crystalline spires that sang with harmonious frequencies, organic buildings that grew and adapted to their inhabitants' needs, and transport networks that moved beings through folded space as easily as walking through a doorway. "The Council of Worlds is ready to convene," announced Zexai, a being from the ethereal collective whose translucent body shimmered with patterns of light that served as both communication and emotional expression. She had become the Assembly's coordinator, a role that would have been impossible under the old imperial system, where only Zephyrians were allowed positions of authority. The Council represented every inhabited world in what had once been the Zephyrian Empire. Today's session would address the most significant discovery since humanity's arrival. They weren't alone in their approach to existence. Deep space sensors had detected evidence of other civilizations that had developed similar technologies, other species that had learned to transcend the traditional limitations of matter and energy. Emperor Zeftar, now calling himself simply Zeftar the Elder, took his place among the council members rather than above them. The transformation from absolute ruler to collaborative leader had been difficult, but he had found it strangely liberating to share responsibility with beings whose perspectives challenged his every assumption. "The signals are definitely artificial," reported Dr. Kalia Voss, the human scientist who led the galaxy's new deep space exploration initiative. "We're detecting at least 12 distinct technological signatures from civilizations that appear to have achieved consciousness-based technology similar to our own." The implications were staggering. If multiple species had independently developed reality-altering technologies, it suggested that such advancement was not unique to humanity, but a natural stage in the evolution of intelligent life. The galaxy might be filled with civilizations waiting to make contact with others who had achieved similar understanding. Admiral Kethvar, now Director of Interstellar Relations, studied the data with the tactical mind that had once planned imperial conquests. If these civilizations are as advanced as we believe, why haven't they made contact before now? Dr. Morrison's response came from Earth, where he continued to coordinate humanity's research efforts. Because advancement of this level brings responsibility. When you can reshape reality with a thought, you have to be very careful about which thoughts you think. These civilizations have probably been waiting for others to prove they're ready for such power. The proof of humanity's readiness was evident throughout the transformed galaxy. On Zarian Prime, former slave worlds had become centers of artistic innovation where beings sculpted with gravity itself and painted with the colors of stars. The botanical worlds, once strip-mined for resources, now hosted gardens that spanned entire continents and served as living laboratories for species that communicated through chemical signals. Most remarkably, the warrior worlds, planets, that had existed solely to train soldiers for Imperial expansion had become academies, where conflict resolution was taught as both science and art. Former generals now studied the psychology of cooperation and learned to channel competitive instincts into collaborative achievements. Princess Kiraval, who had become humanity's primary student and eventually their most effective teacher to other species, presented the day's most important agenda item. We've received a direct communication from one of the detected civilizations. They call themselves the Gardeners. The message that played in the assembly hall was unlike anything they had encountered. It arrived not as electromagnetic radiation or quantum transmission, but as a direct impression in the consciousness of every being present. The communication felt like remembering something important that had been temporarily forgotten. Greetings, young shapers of reality. We have watched your recent growth with great interest. You have achieved in 1 year what most civilizations require millennia to accomplish. We believe you are ready for the next phase of development. The presence behind the message was vast beyond comprehension, yet gentle in a way that suggested infinite patience. Sarah found herself thinking of an ancient oak tree, something that had grown slowly and steadily for centuries, accumulating wisdom along with age. We are the gardeners. We tend to the growth of consciousness throughout this galaxy. When civilizations reach the point where they can reshape reality through will and understanding, they face a choice. Use this power for continued expansion and dominance, or use it to nurture the growth of others. You have chosen wisely. Emperor Zeftar spoke for the assembled council. What is this next phase you speak of? The response came with images that filled their minds. Visions of projects that spanned multiple galaxies. Civilizations that had learned to create new universes to explore. Beings who had transcended physical existence entirely while remaining connected to and protective of those still bound by matter and energy. The next phase is stewardship. You have learned to transform matter and energy. Now you must learn to shepherd the development of consciousness itself. There are galaxies filled with species still fighting over resources and territory. They need teachers who remember what it was like to make the transition from conquest to cooperation. The magnitude of the responsibility was overwhelming. They were being invited to become gardeners themselves, to help other civilizations make the same journey from primitive competition to advanced collaboration that had transformed their own galaxy. Dr. Vextar, whose research had enabled many of the technological breakthroughs of the past year, raised the question that everyone was thinking. Are we truly ready for such responsibility? We've barely learned to manage our own transformation. The gardener's response carried the warmth of ancient laughter. Readiness is not a destination but a journey. You become ready by accepting responsibility and learning from the challenges it brings. Your species, all of your species, have shown that you can grow beyond your origins. That is the only qualification that matters. Sarah Chen felt the weight of the moment. Humanity had come so far from the small blue world that had been invaded just 1 year ago. They had not only survived first contact with a galactic empire, but had transformed that empire into something unprecedented in galactic history. What would be required of us? She asked. Nothing that you have not already begun. Continue to grow. Continue to learn. Continue to help others grow and learn. But do it on a larger scale with a longer view. Think not in terms of single worlds or single civilizations, but in terms of the development of consciousness throughout all possible realities. The session continued. For hours, as the Council grappled with concepts that redefined their understanding of purpose and possibility, they were being offered membership in a community of civilizations that spanned multiple galaxies, each one dedicated to fostering the growth of intelligence and consciousness wherever it emerged. The decision was unanimous. The former Zephyrian Empire, now calling itself the Cooperative Alliance, voted to accept the role of galactic gardeners. They would begin by reaching out to civilizations in nearby galaxies, offering the same gift that humanity had given them, the knowledge that growth was possible, that cooperation was stronger than conquest, and that every species had something unique to contribute to the greater community of conscious beings. As the session ended, Sarah stood again on the observation deck of New Ketha, looking out at stars that now represented not destinations to be reached but partners to be met. The galaxy had become a garden, and they had become its gardeners. The real adventure was just beginning. The journey to the Zephyrian homeworld took 18 days, though the concept of time became meaningless when traveling with humanity's new ships. Admiral Kethvar, now a prisoner aboard his own flagship, watched in fascination and terror as human vessels moved through space in ways that violated everything he understood about physics. The humans had kept their word about providing their own transportation. What they hadn't mentioned was that their ships would somehow carry the captured Zephyrian fleet along with them, locked in a bubble of altered space-time that moved faster than light while experiencing no time dilation. Dr. Morrison had tried to explain the science to him, but the mathematics hurt to contemplate. "We call it probability navigation," Sarah Chen explained during one of their daily conversations. She had assigned herself as the Admiral's liaison, partly for diplomatic reasons and partly because she seemed to enjoy watching his worldview crumble. Instead of moving through space, we convince reality that we're already where we want to be. The universe generally goes along with it rather than deal with the paradox. Kethvar's 4 hands gripped the edges of his desk. "Your species achieved this level of technology in less than a century of spaceflight. It's impossible." "You keep using that word," Sarah replied with amusement. "We found that impossibility is usually just a failure of imagination. When your empire was learning to build energy weapons, we were asking why energy had to behave the way it does. When you mastered faster-than-light travel, we were wondering why light speed was supposed to be a limit in the first place." The Admiral had been reviewing everything the Empire knew about human development, searching for clues they had missed. The records showed a species that had barely learned to split the atom when his grandparents were born. Now they commanded forces that made the Empire's most advanced technology look like stone tools. "How?" he asked simply. Sarah considered the question seriously. "Because we never stopped being curious. Your empire grew comfortable with its advantages. You had the best weapons, the fastest ships, the most territory. So you stopped asking the big questions. We never had those luxuries, so we kept asking." She activated a holographic display showing the human fleet's formation. 50,000 ships moved in perfect coordination around the captured Zephyrian vessels, each one a masterpiece of engineering that shouldn't have been possible to construct with Earth's resources. Every one of these ships was built by automated systems using materials and energy sources your scientists dismissed as theoretical, Sarah continued. "We learned to harness zero-point energy, manipulate dark matter, and use consciousness itself as a computational matrix. Not because we're smarter than you, but because we never stopped believing that everything was possible." The proof of humanity's impossible achievements appeared on sensors as they approached the Zephyrian homeworld of Ketha Prime. The planet was a fortress, protected by defensive platforms that could sterilize continents and surrounded by a fleet of 10,000 warships. It had never fallen to any enemy in 3 millennia of Imperial history. It fell to humanity in 6 hours. The attack began not with weapons, but with information. Human ships somehow accessed the planet's communication networks and broadcast a simple message to every citizen on Ketha Prime. "Your empire invaded our world without cause. We come not as conquerors but as teachers. Learn what we have learned, or learn why your empire ends today." Emperor Zeftar himself appeared on the Planetary Defense Command Center's main screen, his ancient features twisted with rage. "Impossible, vermin. You dare threaten the capital of the greatest empire in galactic history." Sarah Chen's response came from everywhere at once. Every screen, every communication device, every public announcement system on the planet. Your empire ends because it stopped growing. Growth requires change. Change requires admitting you might be wrong. Your people haven't been wrong about anything in 1,000 years. That's not strength, Emperor. That's death. The human demonstration was surgical and devastating. Instead of destroying the defensive platforms, they simply turned them off. Energy weapons that had protected the planet for centuries shut down as human ships somehow convinced their power systems that ammunition was unnecessary. Shield generators that should have been impregnable discovered they were protecting against the wrong type of reality. Admiral Kethvar watched from his command deck as his homeworld's defenses evaporated like morning mist. How are they doing this? Our weapons haven't been damaged, they've just stopped working. Dr. Morrison's voice came through the communication system. We're not breaking your technology, Admiral. We're upgrading it. Every system that touches our quantum field is automatically improved to human standards. Your weapons now understand that violence is inefficient compared to other solutions. The implications hit Kethvar like a physical blow. The humans weren't just superior warriors. They were teachers whose very presence elevated the technology around them. Every ship in the Imperial fleet, every defensive platform on the homeworld, was being quietly converted to operate on principles that prioritized cooperation over destruction. Emperor Zeftar's throne room had been designed to intimidate visitors from across the galaxy. The massive chamber could hold 10,000 beings, its walls covered with trophies from conquered worlds and banners representing 3,000 years of Imperial victories. He sat alone in the center, waiting for the human delegation he had been told was coming. Sarah Chen materialized in front of his throne without using any visible transportation technology. One moment the throne room was empty except for the Emperor. The next, a small human female stood before him as if she had always been there. "Your Imperial Majesty," she said with a respectful bow, "thank you for agreeing to meet with us." "I agreed to nothing," Zeftar roared. "You invaded my system, disabled my defenses, and threatened my people." Sarah's expression was genuinely confused. "Threatened? We haven't harmed a single person on your world. We turned off your weapons because they weren't necessary for this conversation. We came here to talk, not to fight. Then why bring 50,000 warships? Because you wouldn't have listened otherwise." Sarah gestured, and the air above them filled with holographic images showing every battle the Empire had fought in the past 1,000 years. "Your people respond to displays of strength. We brought enough strength to ensure you'd take us seriously." The Emperor studied the small human female, who had somehow penetrated the most secure location in the galaxy. "What do you want?" Sarah's answer was simple and devastating. "We want you to grow up." The holographic display changed, showing not battles but possibilities. Cities that floated among the stars, beings of a dozen species working together on projects that reshaped reality itself, technologies that turned barren worlds into gardens in the space of a single season. "Your empire conquered the galaxy by being stronger than everyone else," Sarah continued. "But conquest isn't growth. It's just taking things from people who are smaller than you. We're here to show you what's possible when you stop trying to be the biggest predator and start trying to be the best version of yourself." Emperor Zeftar had ruled the greatest empire in galactic history for 2 centuries. He had never encountered a species that treated imperial power as a phase of development to be outgrown, rather than a pinnacle to be defended. "And if we refuse?" he asked quietly. Sarah's smile was sad but determined. "Then we'll wait. Sooner or later you'll get curious about what we're building out there among the stars. Curiosity is the one force in the universe that conquest can't defeat." As she spoke, reports began arriving from across the Empire. Human ships were appearing in every system, not as invaders but as teachers offering knowledge and technology to any species willing to learn. The Empire's greatest strength, its vast size, had become its greatest weakness. There were too many worlds to defend against an enemy that didn't want to conquer them. The Empire's 3,000-year reign was ending not with a bang but with a question. What do you want to become? 3 months after humanity's arrival at Ketha Prime, the Zephyrian Empire was unrecognizable, not because it had been destroyed, but because it was evolving in ways that challenged every assumption about how galactic civilizations developed. Sarah Chen stood in the Imperial Science Academy's main laboratory, watching Zephyrian researchers work alongside human scientists on projects that would have been considered impossible just months earlier. The sight still amazed her. Beings who had spent millennia perfecting weapons of conquest now collaborated on technologies that could heal damaged ecosystems and restore dead worlds to life. Dr. Vextar, the former tactical officer who had first detected humanity's impossible technologies, approached with barely contained excitement. "Commander Chen, we've achieved stable quantum consciousness transfer. The implications are—" He paused, struggling with concepts that had no words in his language. "We can preserve the memories and experiences of entire civilizations. Death itself becomes optional." Sarah nodded, unsurprised by yet another breakthrough. "That's excellent progress, Doctor. How are your people adapting to the philosophical implications?" Vextar's scales shifted to deeper blue, a sign of profound contemplation among his species. "That's the most remarkable thing. We expected resistance, fear, perhaps even rebellion against such radical changes. Instead, our people seem relieved, as if they've been waiting their entire lives for permission to stop being conquerors and start being explorers again." The transformation hadn't been without challenges. Admiral Kethfar, now serving as liaison between the Imperial military and humanity's defense forces, had struggled with the revelation that everything he'd dedicated his life to achieving was merely a starting point for genuine advancement. "Your species weaponized. Curiosity," he told Sarah during their weekly debriefing. "That's what I find most disturbing. We built the largest military force in galactic history, and you defeated us by making us interested in something better." Sarah considered his words carefully. "We didn't defeat you, Admiral. We reminded you what you used to be before you became an empire. Your own historical records show that Zephyrians were once explorers and scientists. The conquest came later, when you started believing that being powerful was more important than being curious." The evidence supported her claim. Deep in the Imperial archives, human researchers had discovered records of early Zephyrian civilization, a people who had reached for the stars not to conquer them, but to understand them. Somewhere in their rise to galactic dominance, they had forgotten that knowledge was more valuable than territory. Emperor Zeftar had been the most surprised by his people's rapid adaptation to humanity's presence. He stood now in his private chambers reviewing reports from across his empire. Former empire. He corrected himself, with a mixture of wonder and regret. "Your Majesty," his aide announced, "the monthly planetary reports have arrived." The reports told a story that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. On Korak 7, formerly a mining world stripped of resources to feed the Imperial war machine, Zephyrian engineers worked with human advisors to develop atmospheric processors that could restore breathable air to dead worlds. The planet that had been considered used up and worthless was becoming a garden. On Theta Station, a military outpost that had once projected Imperial power into 3 star systems, scientists from a dozen species collaborated on research into consciousness-based computing. They had discovered that thoughts themselves could be used as a form of energy, making traditional power sources obsolete. Most remarkably, on the border worlds where the Empire had fought its most recent expansion wars, former enemies were working together on projects that benefited everyone involved. Species that had hated each other for generations found common ground in humanity's simple principle: growth through cooperation rather than conquest. "How do they do it?" the Emperor asked his aide. "How do the humans inspire such changes so quickly?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Princess Kiraval, the Emperor's own daughter and heir to the Imperial throne, entered the chamber carrying a datapad filled with her observations of human behavior. "They listen, Father," she said simply. "When they arrive at a world, they don't announce what they're going to do. They ask what the people there want to become, then they show them how to achieve it." She activated the datapad, displaying footage from dozens of worlds across the former empire. In every case, the human approach was the same: arrive quietly, observe carefully, then offer knowledge and assistance rather than demands and threats. "They've visited over 3,000 worlds in the past 3 months, Kiraval continued. Not one military engagement, not one conquest. They simply show up, ask how they can help, and then make impossible things possible." The Emperor studied his daughter's research with growing amazement. "The logistics alone should be impossible. Our fastest scouts needed months to travel between systems. Their ships seemed to be everywhere simultaneously." Dr. Morrison's explanation came during his weekly technology briefing with Imperial leadership. We don't travel between locations in the traditional sense, Your Majesty. We've learned to exist in multiple probability states simultaneously. A single human ship can be present in dozens of systems at once, though only one version of it exists in what you might call primary reality at any given moment. The concept made Admiral Kethvar's head hurt. So when we see a human ship, we might be seeing a probability rather than an actual vessel? Both, Sarah Chen replied. That's the beauty of quantum consciousness navigation. We exist where we need to exist when we need to exist there. Distance becomes irrelevant when you stop thinking of space as something that separates objects and start thinking of it as something that connects them. The practical implications were staggering. Humanity could provide assistance, knowledge, and resources to any location in the galaxy instantly. They had transformed interstellar civilization from a collection of isolated worlds into a connected community where information and help could flow freely. But perhaps the most profound change was in how species across the galaxy began to think about themselves and their purpose. The human example had shown that technological advancement and social evolution were not separate processes, but aspects of the same fundamental growth. On the research station orbiting Ketha Prime, beings from 47 different species worked together on a project that exemplified this new approach. They were building what they called a reality anchor, a device that could stabilize the quantum fluctuations that made certain advanced technologies dangerous to use. The project required not just scientific knowledge but philosophical understanding. The device worked by creating a consensus of consciousness about how reality should behave in a given area. It required representatives from multiple species to literally think together, sharing not just information but ways of perceiving the universe itself. 6 months ago, half these species were at war with each other, Dr. Vextar observed as he watched the research teams collaborate. Now they're sharing their most fundamental beliefs about the nature of existence. Sarah nodded, watching as a crystalline entity that communicated through harmonic frequencies worked alongside a gaseous being that existed primarily as organized electromagnetic fields. That's what happens when you stop trying to prove you're better than someone else and start trying to learn what they can teach you. The transformation was accelerating. Every day brought new breakthroughs, new collaborations, new possibilities that had never been imagined when the galaxy was divided into conquerors and conquered. Humanity's gift to the galaxy wasn't just advanced technology. It was the reminder that every species had something unique to contribute if given the chance to grow rather than merely survive. Emperor Zeftar stood in his garden, looking up at stars that no longer represented territory to be claimed, but potential partners in an endeavor larger than any empire. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in centuries, uncertainty felt like hope rather than threat. The galaxy was learning to dream again. 10 years after the Zephyrian Empire's invasion of Earth, Sarah Chen stood in the council chamber of the Intergalactic Cooperative, watching representatives from 12 galaxies debate the most ambitious project in the history of conscious civilization. The chamber itself was a marvel that would have been impossible to imagine when she first pressed her face against her apartment window to watch alien ships descending through Earth's atmosphere. Built in the space between dimensions, it existed simultaneously in multiple realities, allowing beings of vastly different physical and conceptual natures to interact as equals. The proposal is unprecedented, declared Harmony of Distant Stars, whose crystalline form resonated with frequencies that translated directly into meaning. She represented the symphonic collective from Galaxy M87, a civilization that had learned to communicate through reality-altering music. We speak of nothing less than the conscious evolution of existence itself. The project under discussion had emerged from a question that had puzzled the gardeners for eons. What lay beyond even their advanced understanding? They had mastered matter and energy, learned to nurture consciousness across multiple galaxies, and helped countless civilizations transcend the limitations of competitive thinking. But deeper observation of the universe had revealed something extraordinary. Consciousness itself was evolving, becoming something greater than the sum of its individual manifestations. Dr. Morrison, now existing as pure consciousness but maintaining his familiar personality patterns, presented the theoretical framework they had developed. Every time a civilization makes the transition from conquest to cooperation, something changes in the fundamental structure of reality. It's as if the universe itself learns from each successful transformation. The evidence was compelling. Physical constants that had remained stable for billions of years were showing subtle but measurable changes in regions where consciousness-based civilizations thrived. Space and time flowed differently around communities that had achieved true cooperation. Most remarkably, new dimensions were spontaneously emerging wherever multiple species learned to think together rather than separately. Emperor Zeftar, whose consciousness had merged with the collective memory of his species while retaining his individual perspective, offered the wisdom of someone who had experienced both sides of the Great Transformation. We began as conquerors because we thought the universe was a place of scarcity, where survival required defeating others. We learned to be gardeners when we discovered the universe was abundant enough for everyone to grow. Now we're being asked to consider that the universe itself is conscious and learning from our growth. The implications were staggering. If consciousness was not just a property of individual beings but a fundamental force that shaped reality itself, then their role as gardeners was more significant than they had imagined. They weren't just helping civilizations achieve their potential. They were participating in the universe's own evolution toward something unprecedented. Kiraval, whose consciousness now spanned multiple dimensional states while maintaining her core identity, raised the question that had sparked months of debate. If we proceed with consciousness integration on this scale, we risk losing our individual identities. Are we prepared to become something entirely new for the sake of universal evolution? The answer came from an unexpected source. Admiral Kethvar had chosen to maintain his original physical form, while developing consciousness abilities that allowed him to perceive reality from multiple perspectives simultaneously. We've been becoming something new since the moment the humans arrived in our galaxy, he said. The question isn't whether we'll change, but whether we'll guide that change, consciously or let it happen randomly. Sarah found herself thinking about her journey from logistics coordinator to galactic diplomat to her current role as consciousness evolution theorist. Every step had required letting go of previous assumptions about what was possible while remaining true to the core curiosity that defined humanity's approach to existence. The gardeners have given us access to their deepest archives, she announced, activating a display that filled the chamber with information that challenged every assumption about the nature of reality. They've been observing this process for longer than any of us imagined. Consciousness evolution isn't unique to our cluster of galaxies. It's happening throughout the observable universe, and possibly beyond. The archives revealed a cosmos filled with regions where consciousness had achieved integration on scales that dwarfed even their current understanding. Entire galactic clusters where individual identities had merged into collective entities, capable of creating new universes as easily as thoughts. Zones of reality where consciousness had become the primary organizing force, shaping matter and energy according to principles of beauty, growth, and infinite possibility. They're not asking us to abandon our individuality, Dr. Vextar observed after studying the data. They're showing us how individuality can be preserved within unity. Each merged consciousness retains its unique perspective while gaining access to the insights of countless others. The debate continued for days as representatives from dozens of species grappled with concepts that stretched the limits of language itself. They were being invited to participate in the conscious evolution of existence, to become part of a universe-spanning mind that would retain all of their individual characteristics while transcending the limitations of separate thought. The decision, when it came, was unanimous but gradual. Rather than committing to immediate integration, they chose to begin with small experiments in consciousness sharing, allowing volunteers from each species to explore what unity might feel like, while maintaining strong connections to their individual identities. Sarah was among the first volunteers. Along with Kiraval, Dr. Morrison, and representatives from each of the major civilizations they had helped transform, the experience was unlike anything she had imagined, remaining completely herself while simultaneously experiencing existence from dozens of other perspectives. Through Kiraval's awareness, she felt the joy of a species learning to grow beyond the limitations of their original biology. Through Dr. Morrison's consciousness, she experienced the satisfaction of problems solved and mysteries unraveled. Through the gardener's ancient perspective, She glimpsed the vast patience required to nurture growth across cosmic timescales. But perhaps most remarkably, she retained her essential humanity, the curiosity, stubbornness, and hope that had driven her species to transform first contact from invasion into invitation. The merger didn't erase individual characteristics. It provided a context where each unique perspective became part of a greater symphony of understanding. The experiment lasted only hours in standard time, but the insights gained would guide the next phase of galactic evolution. Consciousness integration was not only possible but desirable, offering capabilities that no individual intelligence could achieve while preserving the diversity of thought that made growth possible. As the session ended, Sarah found herself back in her individual consciousness but forever changed by the experience of unity. She stood once again at an observation deck, this time looking out at a universe where countless civilizations were beginning their own journeys toward cooperative consciousness. "Remarkable," said Kiraval, joining her at the viewing platform. "We began this journey believing we were defending Earth from invasion. We end it preparing to invite the universe itself to grow beyond its current limitations." Sarah smiled, remembering the apartment window where she had first watched alien ships descending toward Earth. Humanity's greatest gift was stubbornness, the refusal to accept that things had to stay the way they were. Now we're teaching the universe itself to be stubborn about its own potential. In the distance, new galaxies were being born as consciousness-integrated civilizations learned to create reality through shared imagination. Each one would become a garden where countless species could discover their own paths to growth and understanding. The universe was learning to dream, and every conscious being would have a voice in shaping those dreams. The invasion of Earth had become the liberation of existence itself, proof that even the smallest acts of curiosity and hope could reshape reality on the largest possible scales. The adventure of consciousness was just beginning, and it would never end.